So Rob, thank you very much for joining me today and speaking with me about the WEIDAP program in Vietnam. It's really great to have you here sharing your stories. I'm hoping we can get started with a little bit of introduction about your background and what's led you to do what you're doing today.
Yeah, it was good to talk about it, and I think stories are always fascinating and people's backgrounds are often critical in that. I personally come from a irrigation farm background, brought up with a shovel irrigating, many years working with my father. I did ag engineering at Melbourne Uni back in the days when ag engineering was recognised, and then went back on the farm and enjoyed that, but also enjoyed the engineering and joined a water authority and been working in all aspects of from the farm level to the Murray-Darling Basin policy level. So it's been a fascinating journey for me, and I've enjoyed every minute of it.
From farm to water, huh?
Yes.
Cool. The next question I have for you is, what is the water efficient program improvement in drought affected provinces, WEIDAP, and what was your involvement in it?
WEIDAP is an acronym for a modernisation project in Vietnam, which following the 2016-15 drought, there was a number of areas of Vietnam that had very high value agriculture in the Central Highlands, all small little areas of perhaps a few hundred to 2,000 hectares each, growing things like coffee, dragon fruit, mangoes, vegetables, etc. that struggled to get enough water in the drought. And this is a $120 million Australian Asian Development Bank loan funded project, which is to modernise 12 different projects in 5 provinces to provide a more secure water supply.
Right. And which provinces are they in Vietnam?
Well, Ninh Thuan, Binh Thuan, Duc Luc, and Duc Nong, and I've forgotten the 5th one. And the projects are very, very similar to what we are actually undertaken in the Riverland and Sunraysia in Australia. In fact, in many ways, similar size pumping pipeline schemes, but spread over perhaps a wider area, or these projects.
Nice. Okay. And how have you experienced any challenges, such as political timelines in completing your project successfully and on time? And how have you dealt with complications such as these?
Well, I suppose it's worth going back and sort of thinking about also how I got involved, in the sense that AWP did some work with the Asian Development Bank to try and give them an overall structure as to, rather than just the physical building bits. Right. And out of that, the Asian Development Bank sent people from all places to Australia, and there were people from the WEIDAP project there. They saw that we had some expertise in different ways of managing irrigation projects, many different styles of institutions, and they asked for some help. And so I was asked to go over and talk to them about that. And the first challenge was, in order to help them, I had to sort of go up a very steep learning curve of all the different organisations and infrastructure and how Vietnam operates, right. To be any use. But even before you could be of any use of that, what I needed to understand was what the project was trying to do. And the first challenge was identified that really I thought their design was not very modern and was actually typically a canal design rather than a pipeline design. Wow. And as a result of that, I was faced with the challenge of, well, we just invited over there to help with a little bit. They're doing a feasibility study. The fundamental design is I think, perhaps could be improved substantially. do you speak up, or do you sit there, or how do you do it? And in this case, I suppose what I was able to do was identify that it was clear that at that stage they were well and truly over budget. And so they were looking for ways to save money, and through suggesting design changes which improved the level of service and meant that it was much more in common with a modernised system, I was also able to cut some costs out of the system. So the challenge was, my challenge then was, well, how are they going to receive this fundamental shift? And that's what's fascinating about Vietnam, is their thirst for information. They've got all the policies, they've got all the theories, but they want the practical. Right. They don't want the theory, and so they responded and said, "Can you actually do a bit of a revised design and give us some ideas?" So the challenge then was, I was booked to fly out in 2 days' time. I had to respond and say, "Well, I'm going to change my flight and stay another week," because if I hadn't responded at the time, at that instant, you wouldn't have been able to do it. I mean, the train is going in Vietnam. It's stopping every now and again. You get a chance to get on and off, but you've got to be at the right station at the right time and be prepared to jump on. And they're moving. They're on the move. So that's part of the challenges, and that's the strength of AWP. AWP does have flexibility. It does have expertise and can respond. And we there was an issue of groundwater. How much groundwater? They'd used groundwater in the past. This new system was going to replace groundwater. Was it going to replace all of it? They didn't really have an understanding of that linkage, which in Australia, we've seen the linkage between groundwater and surface water and how that can change things and how you have to manage it. So I was able to get Greg Holland from Jacobs back within 3 weeks to work with them and look at groundwater. So I suppose that's the flexibility, and it's not a big input. It's being strategic and being practical, I suppose.
Right. Nimble and flexible. Yeah. Can you give us some examples of what is it like working in Vietnam in terms of culture and the importance of relationships?
To be fair, we all have individual personality types, and mine is to be very focused and often outcome, and in Australia we focus often on the contract first, then we think about the technical content, and then if there's any time left over, we might develop a relationship. I have to keep reminding myself that in Asia, you start with the relationship. If the relationship works, they then might let you talk about the technical area, and then if the technical area perhaps works, then you might talk about a contract. And you've actually got to,
so you flip it around,
flip it around quite significantly, and just keeping those relationships. And so much of what we do is about relationships and building with individuals. That's both a strength and a challenge. If someone shifts, and they do, they're jumping quite fluid, and they're being promoted and etc.
So that was sort of a challenge sometimes.
Well, it can be a challenge, and in our case, one of the relationships, the person we built with has been promoted to a senior role, so that's even strengthened it and been fantastic. I wonder if the contact in Vietnam, this Cho, who did his PhD in New Zealand, so he understands us Australians a little bit more, whether if he moved to another section, what would happen? We know in the Asian Development Bank that one of our contacts there, Yasmin, has moved on a bit, and that's changed relationships. Right. So that's part of the fluidity too.
Okay. So relationships is key in working in Vietnam and in Asia, I guess.
Well, of course, it's really key everywhere in the world. But we Westerners sometimes forget that.
We need to remind ourselves all the time,
Yes.
Last question I have for Rob today is, what advice would you give to people who are looking to get involved in water development work in Vietnam?
I've found an incredible thirst for knowledge. It's a country that's definitely on the move. I mean, to come from, and for example, in their rice, post-war, post Vietnam or American War, as they call it, they've had a program to lift their production, and they've now an exporting production in rice. Now they're looking at high value agriculture, and they are very clear about they're on the move and they're going. They understand the principles, they understand the theory, they've worked hard at that, but they are just looking for practical leg ups to get them on the right path. And they're often they understand very clearly what they want the problem addressed. They don't always understand perhaps what's needed to address it.
Okay. They know the problem.
But they're very good at, and I suppose if you work in Vietnam, to me, you've got to try and listen and find out what their problem is, and actually work with that as your starting point. However, the other one is, I think if you're going to work in the water industry anywhere, you need to have a sense of irrigation in its entirety, from governance to water resource planning, to water delivery systems, to entitlements, to allocations, and then right to the farm level. You need to have a framework and an understanding of that, so that holistic, so that when you actually help in one area, you actually have yourself as a practitioner a broader one. I think the other understanding that for me is really important is an understanding that it's a journey of evolution. And Australia has spent 150 years in its water development evolution, and that having an understanding of the Australian history and evolution right back from Alfred Deakin and the Federation drought, which I think some of the things Deakin did in Australia is more relevant and more significant than perhaps some of the even recent water reform, like water measurement and entitlements and water resource and water sharing he did. So having this understanding of a much broader journey, and that we've been on a journey, and that Vietnam and the other countries are on a journey of a similar journey, and some things they're jumping very quickly, and other things they've got to go through the same. And for example, we're working at the national level now in water charging, in full cost recovery of charges. Now, many people younger in Australia won't remember that we went through that process the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and so we need to have that broader understanding in order to work there. But then try and be practical. And flexible and respond to where they are, but have a holistic framework to work in.
And also put relationships as your key number one.
And to maintain relationships. Yes. And that's not only within the country, there's lots of agencies, both within Australia working there, ACR, UN, Canberra universities, ISWARM, IWC, AWA. There's lots of Australian organisations working, and we need to work together and in an Australian way, but also internationally. There's many players and countries, and then on top of that, the local DFAT and offices and connecting it into trade. So understanding all the different players and relationships broader is also critical. And so that's a challenge from here to be able to do that networking, but at the same time deliver something practical.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Rob. In closing this brief interview, is there any last words you would like to say to the audience, the Kini community?
I suppose for me, it's fascinating to learn that there are other ways of doing things, and that the Australian way is not necessarily the best, and that there is always more than one way of skinning the cat.
Right. I think that applies to everything you do, basically.
Yeah, but it's just really all sorts of little cultural differences that we think are absolute, and then you see them and say, well, no, there is another way. It just broadens. I mean, I find that it broadens my outlook.
Right. And you yourself have learned a lot while working in country in Vietnam, I suppose, as well?
Oh, absolutely. And being forced to go back to first principles often. Because they'll say, well, why? Why do you do it that way?
Right.
And you give them the Australian answer, and they still say why.
So it keeps you thinking.
Keeps you thinking, and gets you back to the back to the basics.
The basics. Right. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much, Rob, for your time today and for your story.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Oh, good.
I don't know whether that's.
I think that went well. Yeah. 15 minutes. Sometimes if it goes too long, people tend to get bored.
Yeah. No, I would have thought.
Yeah. So the next steps is I would get the interview transcribed.
Mm-hmm.
Then we would develop some content around it as well as a blog post for the interview. Yeah. And if there's any additional resources you might want to add to the interview, please feel free to do so once it goes live on Kitty.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right.
All right.